and it's wonderful. I say this in all genuineness. We're two amazing products. We don't look at each other as competing products. I think we both complement each other in very different ways, and we offer totally different products, which then allows for more travellers to want to come down to Australia. Because at the end of the day, it's all about promoting Australian tourism as well and bringing more travellers down to Australia. So the better products we have, the more tourism we'll get in general.
Hello, my name is Renae Leith-Manos. Welcome to this podcast, Where to from here, featuring conversations about luxury travel and how it's changing in every pocket of the globe. Hi guys, in Sydney's fiercely competitive luxury hotel landscape, there are two names that consistently dominate the conversation in my notes from if you're talking about Instagram or even on my podcast among discerning travellers. There are two hotels and they are Park Hyatt Sydney, poised on the magnificent Sydney Harbour, and the relatively newcomer Capella Sydney. Today's guest is the rare hotelier who knows both intimately. Marc von Arnim now leads Capella Sydney as general manager, having previously overseen Park Hyatt Sydney, two of the most prestigious addresses, I would say, in Australia, not just Sydney. And Capella Sydney is no ordinary newcomer. Capella is one of the biggest emerging brands in luxury hotels. Here in Sydney, it's housed within the heritage-listed Department of Education building on Bridge Street, a sandstone landmark dating back to 1912 that's been incredibly renovated. And the hotel represents one of the most ambitious, adaptive reuse projects in Australia. We usually see a lot of those in London, but this is the same kind of thing right here in Sydney. The transformation preserves grand Edwardian Baroque architecture while introducing serene contemporary interiors laid with bespoke Australian artworks, residential styling, and almost a reverent scent of calm. Since opening, Capella Sydney has rapidly secured global acclaim. It is full all the time, and the hotel debuted to extraordinary demand and quickly earned international recognition for its design, its service ethos, and immersive guest programming, which is actually a signature of Capella. Under Marc's leadership, Capella Sydney has distinguished itself already, not simply through aesthetic beauty, but through experience design. From curated Capella culturists, one of my favourite things about Capella hotels, who act as modern concierges with deep local knowledge, to the incredible spa, holistic wellness philosophy inspired by lunar cycles, to a culinary program that honours both European technique and Australian produce. One of my favourite things about Capella is the cocktail hour. I'm assuming they have it in Sydney. I can't wait to stay at this incredible property and experience and review it and have that cocktail hour. But Marc's career spans some of the most respected names in global hospitality. And his move from a harbourside icon to a heritage CBD masterpiece reflects both strategic foresight and deep confidence in the Capella vision. I'm sure that was not an easy decision for him to make. He understands that modern luxury travellers, particularly high net worth guests and global tastemakers, now seek more than views and marble bathrooms. They seek narrative, meaning, intimacy, a sense of place, and extraordinary service. Marc, welcome.
Thank you. I think the podcast's over. You've said it all.
It was a big
Well done.
introduction, but when I was writing it, I was really
Yeah.
thinking about the fact that you really are at the forefront, and your, career for many years has been
Thank
of
you.
the two best hotels in the country, best city hotels for sure.
Yeah. I'm very lucky from that point of view. I literally just came from an orientation, which we do every 2 weeks for new colleagues that are joining us, and I talk about it. And some of them understand it, and some don't, because they're relatively young and new into the industry. But you're spot on. I'm very blessed. I'm very lucky to have experienced both of these two amazing properties. So. I think it's a very big privilege that I've had, and it's wonderful. I say this in all genuineness. We're two amazing products. We don't look at each other as competing products. I think we both complement each other in very different ways, and we offer totally different products, which then allows for more travellers to want to come down to Australia. Because at the end of the day, it's all about promoting Australian tourism as well and bringing more travellers down to Australia. So the better products we have, the more tourism we'll get in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And why at this moment are
Mm.
tourists coming to Australia? What are the top 3 reasons?
Yeah, well, the last few days have probably not, they're probably amplifying Australia to be even more a safer place to be. But look, I think, you know, you go back through the history of Australia pre-pandemic and the bushfires, which we had then, you know, 2018 and then 2019. The trajectory of Australian tourism was huge. The growth of international arrivals continually grow year on year and year. Obviously, the pandemic had a big impact upon that, but more in particular for here for Australia, it took a lot longer for us to recover because airlift just was taking longer to come back down to Australia. So I think what we're seeing now, and you'll see this through the Tourism Australia figures, which are about to be released, is that we're nearly at that surpassing of those numbers. But what we're really starting to see is emerging of more different parts of the world. US, Europe have always been very strong, but we're really starting to see a greater impact coming from particularly Korea. Japan is traveling back again, and also India. So we're
And
starting to see a lot of that.
why are those 3 markets? Because Korea particularly,
Yeah,
everywhere in the world, Koreans are everywhere all of a sudden.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
What do
yeah.
you
I think,
attribute that to?
well, you mean, I think, if you look at each of those markets, but if we broke it down just by Korea alone, Koreans love to travel, right? They're very similar mentality. I used to work there, so I understand a little bit. I wouldn't say I understand it intimately, but I think Koreans love to travel. They love to experience, and especially the younger generation. I think what we're seeing a lot more, particularly from all of those markets that I just mentioned, is the younger generation. You know, that 40 and under, and even 35 and under, are a lot more global trotting. You know, they're a lot more open to the world. They're a lot more willing to want to travel. Generations prior to that were a little bit more hindrance upon it, and they were very much more tour group led, whereas this is a lot more FIT led. You know, experiential driven. There's also a lot of students that are coming out to Australia, which then flows in families coming to visit them as well. So I think it's also just the world opening up a lot more. You know, I think Korea also is becoming a more of a hotspot for Australians to want to travel to too. You know, I mean that Korean pop culture, and obviously the food scene in Korea is quite remarkable too. So you know, I think it works both ways.
And where did you work in Korea?
So I was in Busan. So Busan is the second biggest city in Korea. Probably a little bit smaller than Sydney, but not far off it. And it's right down south. So you know, you got Seoul is obviously the capital, very very big city. And then so I went to Busan to open a brand new Park Hyatt over there. So it was
Yeah.
the Park Hyatt in Busan. It was the same owner that owned the Park Hyatt in Seoul, which is quite famous. It's in Gangnam, and it's a beautiful property. And then obviously Busan was a stunning property as well, and loved every minute of it. I was there for nearly 3 years.
How many Park Heights were you at? Because you were at Park Hyatt
Oh,
Goa as well?
yeah, yeah, I was. So my first Park Hyatt was Park Hyatt actually Sydney. No, Melbourne. Sorry, Melbourne was my first Park Hyatt. And then I went to Park Hyatt Sydney. And then I went over to Auckland to not a Park Hyatt,
It's a
and then I went
beautiful
to Goa.
property. Auckland's gorgeous.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then I
I've
went
been
to
there.
yeah, and then I went to Goa. Oh, well, I was in Auckland. It wasn't a Park Hyatt then. So it was, we used to have a Hyatt Regency over there then. This is a long, long time ago. Yeah, I know. I'm going back here a few years now. So our first ever property we had in New Zealand was actually the Hyatt Regency in Auckland, which is no longer a Hyatt anymore. And then the Park Hyatt was built. So I was a part of that process, when I was over there, about working with the state government because of the land, and then obviously with the landholders down there, and then obviously working with Hyatt to get that Park Hyatt built and approved, because we had to, in order for it to work, we had to get a little bit of exceptions done on it, and that was very well done, and well executed. And obviously now it's a beautiful property, and obviously very much a flagship for Auckland in general, which is fantastic. And then I went to Busan, and then I came to Sydney, and then obviously then I now joined Capella 4 and a
Because
bit years ago.
being a luxury hotel reviewer, as I am of over 2
Mm,
decades, and I've spoken to more general managers than I can remember, working for the Park Hyatt,
mm,
especially on a global scale and moving from
sure.
property to property,
Yeah,
is the dream job. So
sure.
you left all that to go to
Yep,
Capella. So
yep,
how did you make that decision, and what was
yep,
the
yeah,
reason that pushed you, over
sure,
the edge to actually choose Capella and to take your career in a different
sure.
direction?
Yeah. Look, it's exactly the same thing I've been telling everyone from the very get go. Long story short is that, this is no disrespect to Hyatt. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for them. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have been given the career opportunities to be able to make the decisions to do different things if it wasn't for them. So I think that this is a very personal decision that it was, is that I felt I needed to. I love the luxury world, and I love that element of hotels in that luxury world. And what I was looking for was a much more smaller, intimate, singular focused brand that was on luxury, and to be able to go and work in that with only one focus and only one obviously desire, which was to build luxury hotels, and to really make sure that we could design our hotels in the locations that we're in to exceed the customers' expectations that were coming to that city. So for me, it was a point in my career in my 40s where if I didn't make that decision now and to do it and to take that leap, I was never going to do it. Does that make sense? So, and so pandemic was on. So it wasn't an ideal time in hotels to be wanting to move or change. But I think there were a couple of different options available to me, to be honest. You know what I mean? From that point of view of brands that fitted that desire that I had. And then obviously Capella was at that point in time was a very young, very new. To be honest, a lot of people hadn't heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
It's
But
still emerging. It's still emerging.
yeah, very much so. And we'll touch on that a little bit more. But I think that I had met the Quay family that are the owners of Pontiac Land during my time at Park Hyatt. I didn't know them intimately, but I knew who they were
They're
and
the
had
owners
met them.
of
And
Capella now.
yeah, well, they're the owners of the asset and
Right.
and also owners of the brand as well.
Huh.
And look, a long story short, a lot of different conversations took place, and it was a long decision, but I think I don't regret it one day, and
Yeah.
I love everything about it
How
that I
fantastic.
that I did. It was 5 years ago that I made that decision. And I joined over 4 years ago now.
So tell me,
And
back then, when you first walked
yeah,
into that building, perhaps before it was finished,
uh
what was there one detail or one moment that made you think this is going to be something truly special? Because let's be honest,
yeah,
there's lots of
yeah,
city hotels in Sydney and in Australia, and Capella
yeah.
is very special.
It is, yeah, and I think the biggest uniqueness of the building is the actual building itself.
Mhm.
It's not what we put inside of it, it was the exterior, this beautiful old sandstone building, with a history of what it was as the Department of Education and Department of Agriculture. You know what I mean? That's really where it all started, and that was where, and obviously we've just recently opened up the building next door to us, the Department of Lands, which is now called the Lands by Capella, which is a mixed-use real estate building. But again, the two buildings are a part of this Bridge Street sandstone precinct. This is where Sydney really started. This is how Australia really was built upon what these buildings represented, what these buildings were designed to do. And that Bridge Street area is the main street. And that's where it all came from. So there's so much storytelling that goes in it. But I think when you look at it as a building initially, before we had Make come in and do it all, they had the bones of just this magnificent building. And
I want to ask you something because I've
mm,
just been in Southeast Asia and
mhm,
the wellness market is growing so
mm,
much
yeah, it is.
that, they're now saying that the spend from a wellness
Uh,
tourist compared to a regular tourist can be double or even triple in some
Correct.
cases. And I know that, like many hotels that I've just seen in Southeast Asia, if someone comes and has a massage at Capella, they have to pay an additional fee to use the pool. Now, is this like a trend that we're going to see globally? What, because that,
Um,
5 years ago, that didn't happen, but it's certainly happening in a
yeah.
lot of hotels, including yours. Can you talk me through
Y
what that's all
Yeah,
about?
yeah. No, I understand. Look, I think there's 2 parts to look at this. I think if you're an outside customer that's not staying in the hotel, coming for a treatment at the hotel, yes, we don't allow them to use the pool area. They would have to pay an extra amount for that. The reason why we do that is for no other reason except that we are looking after our in-house guests. At the end of the day, we center around our in-house guests and to make sure that they have the use of the facilities that they have bought for that period of time. Um, there's also a tremendous amount of demand for our fitness and wellness areas from our in-house guests, and so therefore we must make sure that we're allowing them first use of it. Does that make sense? You mean and look, we are actually only about 40% of our business in the spa treatment areas is outside customers. 60% of it's in-house customer. So the very large majority is actually in-house customers utilizing of our treatment areas.
But are we going to see more of this within luxury hotels generally, like separate
Yeah.
charging for separate elements within the hotel if guests from outside are coming in?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I think, look, I think it all depends. It's a case by case scenario. I think it's a location by location. I think in city, corporate, large, busy hotels like what we are here in Sydney, and if you take any major city in the world, you've got to be mindful of that, because what you got to make sure is in luxuries is that you're always allowing for that luxury element to exist in all areas of the hotel. So, sometimes that's a controlling of the amount of volume that goes into that, right? So it's like a bar, I mean, we could put more people in our bar, but we choose not to. It's only the seat capacity, because we want to make sure that that's creating that intimate feeling that it was designed to be like. So look, I think it'll be a case by case scenario as you go throughout the world.
Yeah, interesting. And look, Sydney and indeed Australia has had an explosion of luxury
Mm,
hotels in the last sort of few
sure.
years.
Hmm.
From where you sit, do you think this growth is sustainable in Australia, or are we headed for some sort of correction, do you
Mm,
think, in the
mm.
Australian luxury hotel
Uh,
market?
Look, if I put my crystal ball on, and obviously no one knows how the markets are going to go or what's going to
Sure.
happen, you know what I mean? But I think if we look at it as we stand right now, as it stands, is that no, I don't. I think that we actually have an undersupply, to be very honest with you, particularly in certain parts of Australia. In Sydney, there's a complete undersupply of hotel rooms, particularly luxury hotel rooms. Yeah, there is. If you just go by the statistics of occupancy year on year growth, it's phenomenal. But that's going to be, what I mean, obviously we've got Waldorf Astoria about to open, and that's probably going to be about it for a while. The cost of build in Australia is just becoming prohibitive. So unless you've got it mixed in with a mixed use real estate where you've got residential and commercial, it makes it very hard for any owner to stack it up to build another hotel of any sort, let alone a luxury hotel. But other parts of Australia, there's been probably a little bit of an oversupply of Melbourne, for instance. It's been documented and written about. There's possibly a bit of an oversupply down there. But honestly, with the way in which our tourism will continue to keep growing in Australia, with our sporting events that we have throughout Australia, with the growth of population, I don't see it being an issue. If anything, I think in certain parts of Australia, we have an undersupply.
And
Yeah.
are we seeing more luxury hotels globally because they are now performing so strongly? Because we've now seen with the advent of AI, the room prices can change at the drop of a hat, at a moment's notice. As soon as the AI detects, oh, hang on, there's all these people booking,
Mm,
prices go up, and
mm,
therefore your
correct.
ROI,
Yep.
particularly in the long term, is much higher. Is that the end game? Is that what we're seeing? What do you think?
Okay, so there's a few different parts to that. Look, I'll answer the AI and that part of it. Look, we're always in any business, you're always looking to maximize your return on investment. Of course, you are. I mean, the investments that are put into any luxury hotel is significant. So, an owner will always be wanting to look for an ROI, and as our responsibilities as general managers and the senior people that are in any organization of hotel chains, it's always about the ROI. Of course it is. So AI definitely helps, you know what I mean? And all of the different systems that you're using and algorithms that you have in place to monitor demand, everyone's using it. And if you're not, then you're crazy. Because you got to maximize that. To answer your question about the growth of the amount of luxury hotels around the world, I think that that is amplified when you look at luxury because they're written about more. If you actually look at the growth of hotels in general, it's more in the select service and that four-star range if you took it on on rooms being built around the world. Because the largest cities of the world are only where you can put a luxury hotel or in very specific locations, because for luxury, you need the room rate. In order to be able to obviously drive your ROI, you've got to get the room rate. So the room rate is driven by the demand for that particular location. And now what we're seeing is the tier two, tier three, or secondary cities or other things is where you'll see a different growth, a growth in the select service brands. And if you take all the major hotel chains, I mean, one of their biggest growth areas is in that select service area, right? And that's sort of different levels. So
With Hyatt,
room
we're seeing
nights,
Caption by Hyatt, which just opened recently
correct,
in Sydney.
spot on,
Kind
yeah, and doing very well and in a perfect location for it, right? And
absolutely.
the Hyatt House and the Hyatt Places and all these sorts of things, So and when you go to Marriott, they've got the same type of thing, and if you go to Intercontinental, they've got the same thing as well, right?
Brilliant.
So they all focus on that. We're not that. That's not us. That's
No.
not who we are. We have two brands, which is Capella and Patina. And Patina, we probably our biggest growth area that we'll have is in our Patina brand. And Capella will obviously continue to make sure that it's only placed into certain key locations that it can see the growth of that property and certain cities.
Tell us a little bit about Patina for our listeners who don't know about this brand.
Sure. Yeah, so Patina is our other brand we have. We're called Capella Hotels and Resorts, but Patina is our other brand. It's our lifestyle luxury brand. We have two properties currently opened. Our first one was in the Maldives, our beautiful property on the Faroe Islands. It was really the flagship of the Patina and very focused around lifestyle. We opened Patina in Osaka last year. I had the pleasure of staying there early this year, and it's a magnificent property. It's right opposite the Osaka Castle. 80% of the rooms look out over Osaka Castle. It's very much a lifestyle hotel. It's very much in the keeping of a luxury, but a little bit more, I suppose, a bit more funkier. Obviously we run DJs in the building. We have art installations that are of a different style. I think it's just a different in keeping. Capella is very much about that refined luxury, about the storytelling of that city and that location you're in. Patina is very much about bringing to life the different aspects of different styles of art, different parts of culture, and the way in which it's designed and the designers that we use are very much that way inclined. So I think Patina will be a lot more growth. We've got Nanjing and Tanjin, which will open up very soon. So they're our next two properties that we're about to open with Patina as well. But for instance, we're opening up Capella in Kyoto on the 23rd of March. So very soon. 20 days.
Is John Blanco the GM?
John's there.
Yeah.
Yep. So John's over there.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of going to visit it. It was just in that last stages of getting everything ready. It's a stunning property. I mean, Kyoto is just a beautiful city in general, and to be honest with you, where the property is located is just stunning. So it'll be
Absolutely.
a beautiful property. Yeah.
John's been on this show and he invited me to review Capella Bangkok, which is a great honour, long before he got the award of the best hotel in the world in his first year of running it, I think. Second.
I think it was their second or third. Yeah,
Pretty
similar to us,
phenomenal,
so
though.
to speak. Yeah. It was. Considering that hotel opened in COVID and then had to close and then reopened again. So,
Yes.
it's just timing is sometimes never great, but it's a beautiful property. It really is.
Yes, I imagine that he'll do an incredible job in Japan.
Yeah, I have no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's a quirky one for you. A lot of people still think of luxury as the classic marble or white
Right.
gloves and concierge, butlers, excuse me, all of that.
Yep.
In your view, what's one old school luxury idea that we need to get rid of, that needs to go? In the industry, I mean, not in Capella.
It's funny you should say that. Those still exist. You know what I mean? To be very honest with you, I think I don't think there's anything that can be taken away currently. I'll be honest with you. I think there are elements of the old school day, which I think, when you talk about the white gloves and that sort, I think there's a time and a place still for some of that, but not everywhere. I think the biggest thing is you got to look at what your customer is going to be staying at your hotel and adapt your hotel to be like your customer. You can't design something that would work in London, to what could work in the Maldives. Do you know what I mean?
So true.
And I
I
think
do know what you mean.
and that's yeah, and I think there is a time and a place for a number of things that when I came up through hotel school, I had to learn the full Gerardon service, at the table, learning how to cook my crepe Suzette from the get-go in front of a customer, being able to talk to them and do it all.
How
There's
hard
still
is
a
that?
time
That
and
must be so hard to learn.
it's very difficult. It's not easy. That's why I'm not in food and beverage. And that and then still today, and I'll give you an example, right? There are still restaurants where it's not the crepe Suzette at the table, but I'll give you like one of my favorite restaurants is Pilu at Freshwater, right? And Giovanni Pilu is an amazing guy. Him and his wife are just
They're
amazing.
coming on the show.
restaurateurs. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So they do this, where they do his version of the tiramisu
Yes.
at the table, right? So I don't know if you've heard about it or seen it, but, here's a table service in a beautiful restaurant overlooking the ocean. It's very chilled. It's very, Hampton style beach house with amazing, Sardinian food. But then he goes and does his nonna's tiramisu, which is a deconstructed tiramisu, but he makes it at the table, and there's a term where you're doing old school table service in a different way. So I think it's just a matter of, I think there are some traditions that we can keep, but we adapt, right, to the new way of doing things, because I still think there are certain things that are just really elegant, and beautiful about those days. But I think it's just about adapting it to the more modern day world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree actually. And I think your
Mm,
Capella culturalists really,
yeah.
really exemplify bringing that local flavour community
Yeah.
experience to your guests to really
Yeah.
remind them that they're at Capella Sydney, they're not at Capella Singapore or
Correct.
Capella Ubud.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a great example of talking about, your traditional concierge, right? Every hotel's traditional concierge. We don't have that. Obviously, we have our culturalists, and at our patinas, we have essentialists. So they're called the essentialist. So yeah, yeah. So they're more than they are a concierge. They come from that background a lot of the time, but they also need to be more than that. They need to be really immersed into the local understanding of where the local businesses are, because what they're all about is not about doing the basics, which you have to do. Certain people want to book certain restaurants, but then there's also the element we got to do out of the ordinary, something that is not normally done that we need to be able to recommend or suggest to somebody, right? So I think that they're a great program, and they're also there in our space in the living room to be able to talk to and tell stories and to bring to life the building. They're more than just a order taker and an order giver.
Yeah, and talking about these culturalists, is there a concept that is in your mind that you would love to have here in Sydney that is only at Capella Sydney that they may offer now or may offer in the future?
Um, I think I don't think there's one thing. I think what we're always trying to do is to try to find something. And this is the ethos of us as a brand, right? When we're creating what we call, we have our rituals and then we have our curates moments. Our rituals are our everyday events, like the cocktail hour, like different things that we do on a regular basis that we all our in-house guests have access to. Our curates moments are very special one-off that you can't buy moments, right? They're about finding things that we are able to curate by working with great partners in order to create that moment so that someone wants to have it. They've got to pay for it, of course. It's not free. Um, but it allows them. It's a money can't buy experience. It's not something a tour operator or anyone else can do. And that's very important for us to globally, that in all of our properties, we're finding those things. Um, there's a lot of time and effort goes into those moments. You know what I mean? For instance, like it's with ourselves working with Sail Away and having a special boat, which is then curated and being able to go to certain areas, learning how to sound. That sounds very basic, but it's a way in which you then curate that and bring it to life. I think there's one thing that if I could get, which was to close down the opera house for one person to be able to do a Madame Butterfly, that is impossible virtually to do. But it would be, if I was going to give you one thing that I would like to do, that I would love to create, that I know people would want, it'd be something like that.
Yeah, no, I
Mm,
agree. I agree.
yeah.
But even I'm just thinking out loud, like the little touches, having reviewed 3 of your hotels
Mm.
globally, the silver bottles with the water in them. I've got 2 next to my
Oh,
bed right now.
this one.
They're
Yeah, yeah,
beautiful, right?
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Fully recyclable.
Yes.
So they're made for us, and we get them fully recycled. So aluminium is fantastic because there could be multiple options of recycling it. So aluminium basically can be continually recycled. So it's really important for us. But literally, we're about to add in our own water bottling plant downstairs. So for all in-house guests now, we've tried to do this at all of our properties. So we're actually going to have one here in the hotel. So in-house, in the room, water will be done through our own water bottling plant, so that we're not having to recycle anything. That it'll just be glass bottles that we then can wash, reseal, fill, put them back into the room, so that we're constantly looking at ways of which we can reduce our effect on, obviously, greenhouse effect, but obviously our emissions. It's very important for us to make sure that we always continually play our part, because hotels are traditionally not the greatest at doing this,
It's a real
to be honest.
challenge. It's a global challenge.
It is. Yeah, yeah, it's very, very important, and so, I think it's an important element that you gotta continually always look for ways of which you can have your effect on making sure that the world that we live in is left for our children and grandchildren and everyone else like that. We all play a part of that.
So true. And speaking of which, what brand of beauty products do you have in the bathrooms?
So currently we've moved to a global brand, which is called Bamford. So Bamford are doing all of our products for us right now, across all of our Patina and Capella properties. It's our unique, a bit of sandalwood and a few other things that are in there. I can't remember all of them, to be very honest with you. That are in the smell and the scent. Obviously, that comes part of it, because it's in keeping with the scent of the buildings that we have, because we have our own scent that's within all our Capella properties. So it's a little bit in keeping with that side of things. So yeah. that's the way we've moved.
Sounds fantastic. Well, look, it's been
Mm,
wonderful to speak to you. I know you said you're
thank
absolutely
you so
hectic
much.
before we started. You're at
A little bit.
90% occupancy. So before we go, we ask everyone where
Yeah.
to from here. And you might be talking about
Mm,
your day ahead, your next
yep.
break away, your next conference. Where to from here
Yeah.
for you, Mark?
Look, for me, it's more about, you know, what I mean, I think for me, it's where to is opening the rest of the lands building and getting that really cemented in our beautiful community that we have here and people going for it. And probably the next one will be, as I said to you, is going back to Pilu, which is one of my favorite restaurants in freshwater, just down the road from where I live, and having some more tiramisu and going for a walk on freshwater beach with my dogs,
Oh,
because that's I need time to switch off. So that's what I do.
sounds
Mm.
idyllic. Really
Yeah,
idyllic.
absolutely.
Well, look, thank you for your time. It's been great
Thank
to
you,
have a
Renee.
chat, and hopefully I'll see you in the
Yeah,
hotel soon.
I hope so too. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for your
much. Have a
time as
great
well.
day.
Thank you.
Bye for
Bye.
now.
Don't forget to subscribe here and follow us on Instagram and Facebook for regular travel updates. You can also hear our episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.